Leg injuries in horses play such an important part that they can literally destroy a trainer or owner. A horse which may be worth $1 million one day can become a $1,000 horse just overnight, simply because he bowed a tendon or injured a suspensory ligament. Now, why do we have this situation? Primarily because the treatments which are now available are not really much good, as you'll see as we progress with this presentation. A new approach has now been developed which is far superior and which makes legs easy to treat, and horses which have bow tendons or other leg injuries can be easily brought back to normal with this method. And I hope that if you clearly understand this method, that from now on you will no longer live in fear of leg injuries. Now, the main reason why in the past we have had so little luck with leg injuries is primarily because very few people clearly understood exactly what happens when a horse injures his leg, and secondly, what should be done to treat that horse. Now, let us look at these rough diagrams here, which demonstrate what happens during an injury. Now, this is a rough schematic showing the structure of a tendon or ligament. You can see these black lines represent the fibers which run parallel to each other, and there are a great number of them, literally thousands and millions. And it has to be remembered, this is a very important point, that the fibers are not firmly attached to each other. They are loosely bound by connective tissue which runs in between them. Now, this is an important point, because if a fiber becomes injured, it is so loosely attached to the one next to it, to the neighboring fiber, that it does not, the injured fiber does not really affect the other fibers or the neighboring fibers to any significant degree. Now, this schematic shows what happens when some of the fibers which make up a tendon or ligament are torn. You can see that these three fibers have been torn, the ends have been dragged apart, there's a fairly wide gap between them. As you can see, the neighboring fibers are not affected by the damage to the fibers. However, the gap, the tear, is now beginning to fill up with blood, which is marked with these red dots here. Now, the next stage, this would perhaps happen, this stage would be reached, let's say, several hours after the original. It should be remembered, and this is an important point, that the circulation in tendons and ligaments is very poor. Therefore, when a tendon tears, when some of the fibers are torn, the gap does not immediately fill with blood. That occurs only some time later. Now, if nothing is done and the process is allowed to proceed at its own pace, the next stage looks something like this. Here we have the same three fibers which are torn. Now the blood has filled the gap or the tear, and the blood begins to seep in between the fibers, as shown here, and also it begins to press on the walls, causing the tendon to assume a bowed appearance. The tendon is not really bowed, but it is pushed apart by the pressure of the blood here. Now, that will then also affect the surrounding lymph and blood vessels, causing stagnation of blood and lymph all around, and causing what we call a swelling, and giving the tendon an increasingly bowed appearance. Now, if nothing is done to halt this process, the tendon will bow increasingly, within reason, depending on the degree of injury, and a larger and larger proportion of the tendon will be affected, and you will get increasing amounts of blood stagnating and lymph and other fluids stagnating around the injured part, the degree of stagnation can occasionally become so great that the entire tendon will actually swell from top to bottom, or only part of the tendon may swell, and this once again gives the tendon a bowed appearance. That's why we say the horse has bowed a tendon. Now, you get two very important things happening here. First of all, the blood itself may seep in through the tissues, between the fibers, solidify and cause so-called adhesions. If nothing is done to promote circulation, the swelling itself may also harden, become organized, and form more adhesions. And in fact, this is one of the most important things that you have to understand about tendons. The original damage may be very insignificant, but the damage caused by the hardening and organization and the production of adhesions, and by the swelling and by the poor circulation, is far greater and far more important than the original injury. In fact, this damage caused by the poor circulation can be thousands of times more important than the original injury. The original injury seldom plays any part in causing the horse to re-injure, but if the swelling is allowed to organize and harden and adhesions are allowed to form, then the horse will re-injure quite readily, because the tendon will become stiff, inelastic, weak, and unable to withstand these stresses of galloping, racing, and other competitive sports. Now that you understand this, we will refer to these diagrams many times later on.